Louisiana Legends is made possible by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana. This informative educational series enables us to discover, through the accomplishments of our fellow Louisianians, the unique character of the state so proudly served by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana for more than 65 years.
When John Laborde looks back on his career and his life, he traces his roots of success all the way back to his childhood in Marksville, Louisiana.
My mother and father were high-principled people who were very gentle in their handling of the family, but were very firm in their beliefs on religion and morality and right and wrong.
Even today, at age 76, John still goes to work at his New Orleans office and keeps reminders of the foundation upon which he built his life.
My dad would cut watermelons on that. He'd stand down here and we'd sit around and eat there.
From that happy childhood, John took a few detours on the way to destiny. The first side trip, the South Pacific, on the World War II staff of General Douglas MacArthur, then college, and a start in business, but still a lifetime away from the oil fields and winding waterways that would make him a Louisiana legend.
Almost opposite that, I started out with a law ambition and ended up with a law degree, so normally those two wouldn't cross.
But normally, a young lawyer wouldn't have a brother who was trying to make a name for himself in a brand new business called offshore drilling. After a few years of doing legal work, John got a call from his big brother, Alden. Together, they had an idea to build supply boats especially for service in the oil industry.
The industry as it was being served by existing equipment, fishing vessels, surplus military vessels of different types, nothing designed specially for this industry.
They started putting rigs out there. The more rigs out there, the more boats are needed.
And the groundbreaking design is today's industry standard.
And of course, they've made ships out of them, and they're tremendous investments and tremendous tools. And that's kind of the evolution of the supply boat business for this whole industry.
John Laborde retired from Tidewater Incorporated just a few years ago. During his time at the helm, it became the largest marine supply boat business in the world. But as his fortunes grew, John always remembered the value of giving back to the people and the state that gave him so much.
A wonderful and loyal citizen he's been, service in the Navy, then using his legal talent for every cause, in the oil business, then in charities, in community events, an all-American, first class.
Even as Tidewater expanded to nearly every body of water on the planet, John always looks back to a front porch in Marksville and a slice of watermelon, and the parents who taught him to settle for nothing but the best.
Whatever successes we've enjoyed in our lives have emanated from that very modest and very simple beginning.
John, thank you for being with Louisiana Legends. We appreciate your presence.
Thank you very much.
What kind of a childhood was that in Marksville?
It was it was a marvelous childhood. I happened to be the youngest of 5 children that my mother and father reared. And all of us my 2 oldest brothers were born out of Marksville, but for the most part, we all considered Marksville our home. Our mother and father were both college graduates and trained in the educational field. My mother was a school teacher. My father was a graduate of Spring Hill College. My mother graduated from Dominican College in New Orleans. And they got together, had 5 children, and pursued their professions. My father was a school teacher, a principal of a high school, and later became superintendent of schools in Avoyelles Parish, had a long tenure there. And then he went on to the college level, went to Southeastern College in Hammond, Louisiana in 1938, became Dean of Men and business manager there. My mother was a homemaker and took care of the rest of us, the balance of her life. My father then proceeded into Baton Rouge, into the State Department of Education, and was head of the physical plants division of the State Department of Education for the state of Louisiana. Then he retired, and then they all returned to the old home in Marksville, and that's where they lived until their death. Marksville, you asked and expressed some surprise over Marksville. If you stop and think, Marksville has been a little town that has produced interesting people in this state.
To say the least.
And hopefully we fall in that category. Marksville is a very sleepy French Catholic community, about 4,000 to 5,000 people then, and about the same now, as I appreciate it. And it was an area where that depended primarily on the farming income. Its economy was based on farming. It was a rural life community centered around the Catholic Church primarily, and the schools and the families. It was not glamorous, was not a wealthy environment, but a very wholesome one, and probably was a little easier to raise children in that kind of environment than we're facing today.
And as you pointed out to me earlier, your dad was a salaried man, and that's how y'all lived.
Absolutely. All of his life, he lived on a salary, which was considered certainly adequate, but not enough to create wealth. So that was not part of our life. My father's favorite quote was moderation. He believed in moderation in everything you did as a human being. And combining that with common sense, he felt that he would live his life that way, and tried to instill that same atmosphere to us as his children. So I guess we'd be considered moderate conservatives in today's parlance.
Sir, you spent some time at Marksville High from 36 to 40, and then y'all moved to Hammond. And you went to Hammond High.
Did all my grammar school in Marksville. In 1938, in my junior year of high school, I moved to Hammond because my father became a part of Southeastern College. So I graduated from Hammond High School, having spent 2 years there. From there, we went on to Baton Rouge, and I entered LSU in 1940.
In what field?
The general field, but with an idea toward, I was in a pre-law course with the idea of attending law school at the proper time. In 1940, there was no actual war, so we hadn't cranked in the factor of military service intervening in our college education.
And you were in the ROTC at LSU.
I was in ROTC at LSU in 1940. All male students were required to be in ROTC, and I seemed to take to that pretty well and was able to advance pretty well within the ROTC ranks. And incidentally became the cadet colonel.
I didn't know that.
At LSU in early 1943, and shortly thereafter we were conscripted and drafted into the service. So
and you went to Fort Benning.
Went to Fort Benning, Georgia, in the infantry school.
And you were on the adjutant general's staff of a man who was rather well known, one General Douglas MacArthur.
I think that I had almost two miracles that happened to me during my service tenure that saved my life. Because, as you know, infantry second lieutenants are a dime a dozen, and my class graduated in October of 1943, and most of my classmates who were from LSU went to Europe just pretty well just in time for D-Day, which was June 6, 1944. Because I finished high in my class at Fort Benning, my orders retained me at Fort Benning for a few months more to take another class through the infantry school as their supervisor. They called them tactical officers. That was the first thing that helped my career. And then from there, I was ordered to the Pacific and went overseas and to the Pacific, went directly from Fort Benning to New Guinea in the Southwest Pacific. Then I went up to Leyte shortly, just a couple of weeks after the invasion of Leyte, and there joined General Douglas, was assigned to, it was a rather unique thing, but before I left Fort Benning, Georgia, while I was spending my last 2 or 3 weeks there to complete my assignment, one of the old battalion commanders asked me to come over and be his adjutant on a temporary basis. So I did that. Therefore, my record showed something of 3 weeks' work as an adjutant in a battalion organization. That was in my record. When I arrived in Leyte in the Philippines, I was assigned to the 24th Infantry Division, and somehow got interviewed and called in along with 200 or 300 others who had an adjutant's background. And I was interviewed, interestingly enough, by Dick Bowling, who later became a congressman from Missouri and one of the leaders of the Democratic Party. He was a captain on General MacArthur's staff. He interviewed, and finally at the end of the second day, he said, "You know, you're my man." I said, "I'm an infantry officer." He said, "Are you refusing this assignment?" Thinking of the rules of the military, I figured it wasn't a good idea to refuse an assignment. So at any rate, I was picked up within a few days and moved to Toloso in the Philippines, and joined General MacArthur's advanced echelon headquarters. And I stayed with that group up to Manila, which had just fallen.
Did you have any personal contact, or much personal contact, with General MacArthur?
Yes, strangely enough, even as a first lieutenant, we handled all of the incoming and outgoing messages that came into the advanced echelon of general headquarters. So there were 3 or 4 of us who had access to all of the top secret information and the eyes-only information. And sometimes when we got messages for General MacArthur or his chief staff group, they were classified as for his eyes only and to be delivered directly to him. So on some occasions, we had occasion to do that. And he was always very gracious and very nice to young officers.
Was he intimidating?
Not at all. Not at all. He was a magnificent leader. When you talk about cultured and blue blood, you're talking about General MacArthur. His whole background was one of high-class citizenship. I had tremendous respect, as did many, many others, much more important people than myself. I was pretty much of a nobody, you know, being a staff person, but General MacArthur commanded the respect of all of his people that knew him. There was a lot of resentment in the press for the fact that his wife was not far behind in some of these movements in the Pacific. We all figured that was just fine to have a man of his experience and talent leading us in that operation.
John,
made all the sense in the world to have him comfortable. He had not been back to this country in 27 years, as I recall.
Oh my goodness! I want to ask you this. I'm going to kind of break into. Would you call, and this is going to be probably the strangest question you will be asked in your distinguished career, would you have described yourself as an ambitious man?
Yes, I think I don't look on that as derogatory at all.
Hardly. Yeah.
Yes, I think I was ambitious my whole life because our mother and father created an atmosphere of achievement, of moving and using your talents and not being abrasive about it or offensive about it, but as a matter of fact, I think we tried to combine some timidity and some reservedness with an innermost ambitious character, and hopefully we were able to achieve that.
Sir, how did you start that largest of its kind company in the world? How did you ever start that?
Up to 1950, the offshore industry was almost non-existent. It did exist in a few instances, but no volume at all and no techniques involved. So the existing offshore activities were being serviced by vessels which were surplus military vessels of different types, tugs and barges that could go offshore short distances. But as you can appreciate, all of that was not ideal. My brother Alden, who had a naval background,
Annapolis,
from Annapolis, had an idea that he probably penned out on a napkin or something of a forward pilot houseboat that had an open deck on the stern, and he and 8 or 10 other guys that he put together built a couple of those boats as experimental more than anything else. They had no money, and they started that. One of the guys was an investment banker, and he had some ideas of what public ownership meant, so forth. So as those 2 boats came along and seemed to be working okay, it became their idea that this thing could be developed into something that was more than just a backyard operation. And they approached me. I was working for an independent oil man by the name of Sid Richardson out of Fort Worth, Texas. He and Perry Bass worked together in Louisiana, and I was a lawyer, landman for them. They came to me and asked if I would join and organize Tidewater Marine Service, Inc., which was the forerunner to Tidewater, Inc. And I didn't know much about boats or that. I was a lawyer and a landman and buying leases.
It's a wonderful story. Yeah.
Well, anyway, and so I think Alden characterized it, I didn't know the bow from the stern of a boat, so I think it was a little better than that, but nevertheless, so I decided to try that, and so I opened a little office in the Warwick building here.
In New Orleans?
In New Orleans, where Richardson Bass had their offices on the ground floor. I took a little apartment on the second floor. I didn't want to get too far away in case this thing didn't work. And hired a secretary and bought a typewriter, and that's where we started. And went from there. We raised $485,000 in the St. Louis area from public investors. With that, went to the Whitney National Bank and borrowed $1.3 million from Keene Berry, who was the chairman of the board in those days. And we ordered and started building better boats than those were. And that started it, and then we acquired some smaller equipment that was available and kept building, and others then started building. We acquired, I think I counted that we made probably 17 acquisitions during my career of different sizes, mostly competitors. In 1968, we acquired our largest competitor out of Morgan City called 20 Grand Marine Service. The Grisco family was the principal owners of that.
Sir, is that company now operating virtually all over the world?
Tidewater? Yes, it and has been for between 1960 and 1980. We expanded all over the world, and I had an awful lot of good employees who were scared to death on the first international exposure, which was Venezuela in 1958. But after that, they became more accustomed to the fact that that was not, we weren't going to drop off the end of the earth in any of these areas. And we started moving very aggressively, and the industry started moving.
Did you think that y'all would get as big as you got?
No dream of that, frankly. That was really not the ambition. The question was taking advantages of opportunities that presented themselves. And because we were a public investor-owned company, I always had one director who was very optimistic about everything we did and very supportive. His name was Birch Williams, and he was an investment banker who was one of the original investors. But Birch always said that since we're a public investor company, anything that we have in the way of a good idea, we can get money for. And that's kind of the principle we followed throughout the history of Tidewater. It kept growing. We had more and more opportunities. We kept building boats. We kept making acquisitions. We kept getting new and better contracts along the way. And we developed a reputation for good service, good equipment, and high integrity in our business. You know, when I was approached to get into this with the early people, my impression was that it was a pretty sordid business. There was lots of uncommon business practices, and I was told we'd have to do some of that. And I said, I don't think we'll do that. We'll make our way the best way we know how, but it'll be on the basis of good service, first-class equipment, and good employees. And one of the first comments that was made to me, well, you don't have to do very much as CEO. All you need to do is buy lunch for the customers and play a little golf. And I thought, well, that didn't sound too good because I wasn't much of a golfer. I could probably handle lunch all right. But that turned out to be somewhat of a mockery. But it didn't have a very wholesome, none of the service industries had a very wholesome atmosphere or reputation, and that was was sad because that's not the way to do business.
Sir, now that you're retired as president, CEO, the whole thing, are you enjoying life? You're still on the board, I know.
Yes, I am, and I am enjoying life. I have 5 children and 14 grandchildren, and they're all fortunately around New Orleans. I can see them most any day that I want to. Since I've retired, we've made some investments with some of my sons who are managing different phases of oil field service businesses, and I try to stay out of their way, but I also keep an eye on that. And I don't share office space with them, but I do answer the phone when they call. And so, yes, I am enjoying that. I still haven't learned how to relax too well.
There's no honor. I was looking at your resume. There is no honor that this city of New Orleans or your industry, the oil industry, the marine, has not given to John Laborde. Your incredible contributions to the industry, to this state, have really been recognized, and I like that because that's not always the case.
No, that's true. And in addition to working with Tidewater, and we worked hard. I guess I've been criticized to some extent on occasion by some of our employees because we work too hard. But you know, a service industry is a 24-hour-a-day industry, 365 days a year. So I certainly recognize that and tried to set the example for hard work. Our people followed that example, and they worked hard also.
John, we're almost out of time. This 30 minutes have flown, but I want you to know what an honor and what a pleasure it is to bring you to your fellow Louisianians. I hope that some kids in rural areas like Marksville, that kind of thing, I hope that they're our viewers, because if anything, you're not only a great man, but what an inspiration. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate being recognized by the Legends group.
Good, sir.
Thank you.
Louisiana Legends is made possible by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana. This informative educational series enables us to discover, through the accomplishments of our fellow Louisianians, the unique character of the state so proudly served by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana for more than 65 years.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or go online to www.lpb.org.